ready to really master a tricky but totally conquerable part of the IELTS reading section. We're going deep into matching headings today. It can feel a bit like a puzzle, but don't worry, with the right approach, you'll be matching like a pro.
You know, it's funny, matching headings really shows how good you are at getting to the core of a paragraph, without getting lost in the details. It's a skill that's so valuable beyond just the IELTS.
Absolutely. So we've got expert advice today, courtesy of Mr. George at the IELTS Resource Center. He's seen it all when it comes to this question type, and he's sharing some really amazing strategies. But first things first, what exactly is matching headings?
Okay, imagine this. You've got a long reading passage, right? And it's broken up into sections, each with its own main idea. And you're also given this list of headings. Think of them like little mini titles. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to match each heading to the correct section.
So it's like figuring out which label goes on which jar, but with ideas instead of jam.
Exactly. And Mr. George really emphasizes something crucial here. It's not about finding exact word matches. The IELTS is sneaky. They'll often paraphrase or use synonyms to make you really think.
Okay, that makes sense. But where do we even begin? What's the first step in all this matching madness?
Mr. George is all about having a system. His first tip is deceptively simple. Read the headings carefully before even diving into the text. Get a feel for what each one is about, and even try grouping similar headings together in your mind.
That's interesting. Like pre-sorting the puzzle pieces before you even start trying to fit them together. I can see how that would help avoid confusion later on. What's next?
Then comes the skimming part. Now, you might be tempted to read the whole passage really carefully, but Mr. George warns against that. It's a total time trap. Instead, focus on that first sentence of each paragraph. That's often where the main idea is hiding, what we call the topic sentence.
So we're basically playing detective, looking for those key clues that tell us what the paragraph is really about. I love it. But sometimes a topic sentence might not scream main idea at us.
Yeah.
What do we do then?
Mr. George has a trick for that, too. He says if the topic sentence isn't super clear, look at the first two sentences together. Often you'll find some repeated ideas or keywords that give you a better sense of the overall theme. Think of it like this. Sometimes the clue is hidden in plain sight, and sometimes it's about piecing together those small details.
That's a great tip. So we've got our headings pre-sorted. We've skimmed for topic sentences. Now we're ready to match right.
Almost. This is where things can get a bit tricky. Mr. George highlights a few common traps that trip people up. One of the biggest ones is those pesky similar headings.
Oh, I hate those.
Yeah.
Like, they both kind of sound right. How do we choose?
He has a great analogy for this. Think about choosing the best title for a book, not just a chapter title. Which heading really captures the primary focus of the paragraph? The overarching theme, not just one tiny detail. Sometimes it helps to ask yourself, what's the point this paragraph is trying to make?
So it's about zooming out and seeing the bigger picture again. That makes a lot of sense. What other traps should we be watching out for?
Another one is overthinking, getting so bogged down in all the little details that you lose sight of that main idea. It's like that classic detective scene where they're focusing on one tiny footprint instead of the giant obvious clue right in front of them.
Oh yeah, I've totally done that before. It's easy to get lost in the weeds.
Mr. George says to remember you're not doing a deep analysis of the passage, you're just matching headings. Skim, get the gist, make your match, and move on.
That's great advice. Okay, I'm ready for the last trap. Hit me.
The last one's all about vocabulary. Remember how the IELTS loves to use synonyms and paraphrases? Well, if you're not comfortable with different ways of saying the same thing, you might miss the connection. It's like they're testing your word power along with your reading comprehension skills.
Yes. Sometimes it feels like they're speaking a different language, even though it's all English.
Yeah.
Any tips for boosting our synonym game besides just learning more words?
Mr. George is a big fan of word association games. It's a fun way to expand your vocabulary and get used to thinking about different ways to express the same idea. You could even try paraphrasing sentences from articles you read. It's like a mini workout for your brain.
Those are some great ideas. So we've got the steps, we've got the traps. How about we see all this in action with a real example?
All right, so let's say you're in the middle of the IELTS reading test and you come across this passage about wildlife conservation. I'll give you a little excerpt and a few headings to match. Ready to put on your detective hat and put those skills to the test.
Hit me with it. I'm feeling surprisingly confident after all these great tips from Mr. George.
All right, here's the excerpt. National parks play a vital role in preserving endangered species. By providing these protected habitats, these areas offer a refuge from the threats that these animals face in the wild. And here are your heading options. the importance of biodiversity, the role of protected areas in conservation, and threats to endangered species.
Okay, so remember what Mr. George said. Let's focus on that topic sentence. National parks play a vital role in preserving endangered species. That seems to be screaming conservation to me.
Right. It's really laying out the main point of the paragraph right from the start. So which heading seems like the best fit considering that?
Well, threats to endangered species doesn't really fit. The excerpt is more about the solution to those threats, not the threats themselves.
Good point. It's easy to get distracted by those key words, but we've got to focus on that overall message. What about the other two options?
The importance of biodiversity is a bit too broad, I think. The excerpt is specifically about the role of protected areas in conservation. So I'm going to go with the role of protected areas in conservation as the best match.
You nailed it. See? Mr. George's tips really do work. You identify that topic sentence, you considered the overall message, and you eliminated the options that didn't quite fit.
Feels good to get one right.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, time pressure is a real thing in the IELTS. How did Mr. George's star student Ada manage to stay on track?
Ada's all about strategy. She developed this 3-step system that helped her use her time wisely. First, she'd skim all the headings quickly, just a quick glance to get a feel for what they were about. She wouldn't spend more than 2 minutes on this step.
So kind of like getting a lay of the land before you start really exploring?
Exactly. Then she'd move on to skimming the entire passage, focusing on those topic sentences and key phrases to get the gist of each paragraph. This would take her about 5 minutes.
Sounds like a balancing act between speed and really understanding. Did she ever worry about missing important details by skimming?
She did at first, but she realized that getting bogged down in every single word was actually more likely to make her lose track of those main ideas. It's about finding that sweet spot between speed and comprehension. Finally armed with her understanding of the headings and the passage, Ada would dive into matching, leaving any tricky ones for last if time allowed.
I like that. It's a strategic approach. So Mr. George's focus on the topic sentence really seems key here. Why do you think he emphasizes it so much for matching headings?
It's all about efficiency. Think about it. If you can quickly grasp the main idea of a paragraph from that topic sentence, you don't have to waste precious time reading every single word. It's like having a shortcut to the heart of the matter.
But what about those tricky paragraphs where the topic sentence isn't so obvious? What does Mr. George suggest for those?
He actually anticipated that. He says that even in those cases, there are still clues to be found. Often, you can look at the first 2 sentences together and see if any repeated ideas or keywords emerge. It's like a subtle form of emphasis. The writer is hinting at the main point without explicitly stating it.
So it's still about looking for those patterns and connections, even if they're not just like spelled out for us. It's like being a detective, but with words.
Exactly. And sometimes you might need to look beyond the first 2 sentences and consider the overall tone and those keywords in the paragraph. It's about using all the evidence at your disposal to piece together that puzzle. Ready to try another example?
Bring it on. I'm starting to enjoy this detective work.
Okay, so how about this excerpt? The establishment of national parks has also had positive economic impacts. Tourism revenue generated from these areas often contributes significantly to local communities and national economies.
And the heading options.
All right, you've got 3. The economic benefits of conservation, challenges facing national parks, and the role of tourism in conservation.
Interesting. Okay, let's break it down. The first sentence says, the establishment of national parks has also had positive economic impacts. That's a pretty clear topic sentence, right?
Yes, and it immediately points us to that economic aspect of national parks.
So we can rule out challenges facing national parks right away. It's not about the problems, but the good stuff they do. Exactly.
Now we're left with the economic benefits of conservation and the role of tourism in conservation. Both seem relevant, at first glance.
They do both kind of touch on those similar ideas. But if I think back to Mr. George's advice about choosing that best book title, I think the economic benefits of conservation is a bit too broad. The excerpt specifically mentions tourism revenue as like a key economic benefit.
That's a great observation. You're right. The excerpt really focuses on those specific economic benefits that come from tourism related to conservation efforts.
So the role of tourism in conservation seems like the most accurate match. It really captures that specific relationship, between tourism and the economic benefits it brings to conservation.
You're on a roll. You're really starting to master Mr. George's techniques. It's all about paying attention to those key words and thinking about the overall message.
This has been so helpful. I feel much more confident about tackling matching headings now. Any final words of wisdom from Mr. George before we wrap up?
He really stressed that practice is key. The more you work with different IELTS reading passages, the easier it'll be to spot those topic sentences and navigate, those sometimes tricky headings.
It's like anything, the more you do it, the easier it gets right.
Exactly. And don't forget to use those elimination strategies we talked about. Sometimes knowing what doesn't fit is just as helpful as knowing what does.
True. It's all about narrowing down the possibilities till you find that best match.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And hey, remember, Mr. George has a ton of resources available at the IELTS Resource Center, including practice tests and, personalized feedback. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need some extra support.
That's great to know. Well, this deep dive has been a total game changer. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to tackle matching headings. I'm feeling good.
That's amazing to hear. Remember, with a bit of practice and Mr. George's expert guidance, you'll be well on your way to acing the IELTS reading section.
Thanks for sharing all these great insights with us today. It's been a pleasure as always. And to all our listeners out there, happy studying. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.